So let's just get into this because, when people are trying to make choices around, we were talking about insurance or financial plan, there's a million choices. And if you're new to that game, of course, it's very difficult to maybe help guide somebody. I would imagine in commercial real estate, it's the same. I mean, there's so many different ways that you can go about setting up shop.
Absolutely. The old adage, there's, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And one of the mistakes or one of the items that business owners generally don't know, whether they're small or even large businesses, is how their lease is structured. And if you can develop a lease and work with your agent, broker, accountant, attorney to draft, craft, enable the lease to fit your business need, that's the ounce of prevention going in. And we've talked about it in other shows where a lot of small business owners think that they should know everything there is to know about leasing, and they don't because they do it once every 3, 5, 10 years. And a lot changes in the industry. A lot of tax implications change. A lot of operating expense changes go on. Lease structures differ. And in order for them to get the best deal to fit their business model, that ounce of prevention means you hire a professional to help you execute that strategy.
And when you talk about the best deal for their business, I would imagine there's so many different businesses, and so there's so many different ways to structure that effectively.
Correct. If you're running a retail operation, depending on the size of facility you have, location, and the type of landlord, you'll have like a triple net lease. Rarely will you have a gross lease, but you'll have what they in the retail industry what they call a percent rent or percent lease, and that is basically you pay a base rent, you pay some operating expenses, and in retail it's location, 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 and if you have a good location, the landlord will want a percent of your gross revenues as part of the lease payment. So that is one item in the retail side. If you're looking in the office,
well, that's interesting because now that landlord has a vested interest in helping you run your business.
Well, yes, a vested interest, and they want you to be successful because that makes their lease more valuable.
Correct.
But then when you go in to negotiate that and you look at your revenues and how you want your retail operations to expand, there's all sorts of little nuances in there which the landlord will restrict you from selling your wares across the street, down the road, in the area. And so those are some of the things that
handcuff you a bit.
It's to their benefit to do so. Mm-hmm. And depending on your what you're selling, your retail commodity, that can help you, or it can also limit your growth and limit your abilities.
Yeah. So I have never heard of that because I've never owned a retail store potentially. But so what are some of the other big lease, structures that are out there that people need to think about?
So, the most common lease structure that most small businesses are going to have is what they have called a triple net lease. And it's morphed over the years with the general accounting procedures and policies. And when landlords have maximized their rent, landlords get more sophisticated, tenants get more sophisticated, the tax code gets more complicated.
And the newbies are stuck in the dark. And
so over the last 5 years, I've just kind of seen it become more and more. And when the landlords aren't able to quite be profitable enough on their base rent, which is now static or prescribed in the lease, they start to add more on to the operating expense or the triple nets. And the basis for the triple nets, and this is when most people don't know this, but the N's, you'll see NNN, and that stands for taxes, utilities, and insurance.
Which is funny because none of those start with N.
But it means your base rent, net operating expenses. And so those three costs in and of themselves, they used to be standalone, but those three costs are not controlled by the landlord.
So there's taxes,
utilities, and insurance.
And so basically what you're saying in triple net is not only now you're going to pay the lease and you're going to pay the taxes?
Insurance and utilities for the entire complex or the center, your pro rata share. So if it's a 10,000 square foot building, you're 1,000 square feet, you're going to pay 10% of those costs.
It's kind of interesting because, if I was going to rent a house, I would never expect to pay part of the homeowner's insurance, or I would never expect to pay some of the property taxes.
Correct, but you would hopefully the landlord has already factored that into the rent. But you also pay your separately metered utilities, your cable, power, gas, garbage, sewer, water. Well, maybe not sewer, water, but in the commercial side, you end up taking these park run costs, landscaping, snow removal, the parking lot lights, that light outside. They usually put a 5% reserve in for maintenance. There's HVAC units on the roof that have kind of a life cycle, and they know what those are. So those are some of the costs. Those are the costs that go into your triple nets. Now, as costs of business have increased, landlords have gotten a little more, I would say, not tight. And so you'll see little sentences in the agreement there that says, and it pays for property management insurance, benefits, perks, so on and so forth. And so when you, as a tenant or a broker, when you look at that, you go, whoa, how come I'm paying for the property manager's insurance? I'll pay for the insurance for the park. That's a cost of business that we all incur. Property management should pay that. So that's the property management tweaking their costs, their business costs, passing it on to the landlord, and landlord doesn't care because he's going to pass it right on to the tenant. So as a tenant, you need to kind of strike that line out of there and or say, well, I'm also not going to pay for your vacations, for your health care, for your bonuses.
If you'd like to run your own business, this is how I'm paying you.
Absolutely. And so it gets a little nebulous in there. And if you don't have an attorney review your lease at minimal, or a broker to say, and ask them, what does that actually mean? And the term triple nets and or operating expenses are interchangeable. And I've seen, tenants glaze over when I go back and forth saying this is a triple nets or it's operating expenses. Stop them and say, is that one and the same? And it is. But the triple nets are the three uncontrollable costs that the landlord incurs. Everything else is operating expenses.
Now, I want to stick on this for a minute because in this case, there, like you talked about landscaping being in there.
Correct.
In some cases, would it not, is the landlord no longer, I guess, under any pressure to try to keep costs down? I mean, hey, we're going to get the best light bulbs. We're going to get we're going to have this ultimate cleaning service to the parking lot, and we're going to paint right? I mean, isn't there some point here where the landlord is actually incentivized in some way because it doesn't cost him anything?
Absolutely.
To just keep the building at the absolute peak at other people's costs.
Absolutely. And Ben, that's why you would make an outstanding tenant and negotiator. Because one of the things that I advise my tenants to do, depending on the park, depending on the size of the structure, the use, the appearance, you can negotiate different elements in there that says, the triple nets are a fixed rate, and the landlord won't mess with those because he or she has no control over the insurance criteria, utilities, and or the taxes. That's municipality and the agencies tell them what they're going to pay, and they pay it.
Which is, I understand that, right?
And that's reasonable.
Unless the landlord is also the mayor, in which case, I guess then he's just trying to. That's a whole other topic.
Yes, that's a whole other topic. But what tenants tenants can do, and through your broker, which is say, we'll pay the triple nets. However, we'll put a cap or a ceiling of 3 to 5% is usual and customary on all other landlord-controlled costs. So that way, if the landlord's brother-in-law happens to be
the landscaper,
he doesn't get a real sweet deal.
Right.
Or if he's part owner in a cabling company, or the landlord limits you to a certain set of contractors that, again, happen to be a brother-in-law, family member.
Right, and that's what I'm thinking, right? It's not only keeping the business or the building in tip-top condition, but, landlords oftentimes are involved in other businesses. A lot of business owners are.
Absolutely. And there's also what you have to argue is what is a repair and maintenance issue, which is non-capitalized and or capitalized expenses. Because if the landlord wanted to, if the lease was loose enough, they could say, oh, we're going to replace the mammoth units on the building, and that's, $500,000. Well, we're not going to capitalize that. So everyone's going to pay that this year. and that gets spread through the building. Now, they wouldn't do that normally, but that's an egregious example.
Sure.
But you want to make sure.
Well, it could be anything. It could be the windows. I mean, you could put anything on there.
Absolutely. And like I say, you look at the window, if it's a high-rise, you look at the window cleaning schedule. Is it twice a year? Is it once a year? Is it inside and out? Those are some of the things that, depending on, again, the structure, the size of the space, the grade of the property, A, B, and C, those are things you have to look at and negotiate in the lease.
Once again, and I know there's a couple other types of leases which we'll have to save for another time.
All right.
But when you start thinking about all the different ways, it's interesting to me because here's my big picture here.
Give it to me.
In business, in anything, it seems like there are going to be people who work to win-win solutions. There are probably landlords out there who are not trying to squeeze this little property management thing into their lease, and they're more above the board.
Yes. The greater majority are.
But there are a lot of people, and I've worked with them, that want to squeeze every penny out of every deal, and they think it's good business to actually try to, literally just squeeze everything you can out of the other person. And it's really interesting to me, these two different ways that people do business. And I would think a landlord-tenant would be one of those really obvious, glaring ways, especially if you're a broker and you know all this stuff, where you're able to say, this guy is just trying to screw this other guy.
Yes, and one of the... there's 10%.
You must even know who those landlords are.
You have a good idea after a few years in the industry. You have a good idea who they are, and they generally tend to work with a set of brokers who follow that philosophy as well. And I am not one of those, and I only represent really one landlord. And that landlord is a long-term hold person. They treat their tenants incredibly well. And if they didn't, I wouldn't represent them. Yeah,
very interesting. Not just in real estate, but I think across the board,
yes. There are people out there that will.
They feel like everything is it's a win-lose.
Yeah.